Good evening. My name is Rashid Akil. I am the chair of the Citizen Review Board. At this time, the Tuesday, July 26, 2022 meeting of the Citizen Review Board is now called to order. If you will, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Secretary, if you will, please conduct a roll call.
Banks.
Present.
Collins.
Present.
Tamayo.
Present.
Reyes.
Present.
Guy.
Present.
Akil.
Present.
Ingandela.
Present.
Valdez.
Present.
Irvin.
Let the record show that all members of the Citizen Review Board are present with the exception of Robert Irvin. I will now ask my Vice Chair to continue with the meeting guideline.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening.
I'm sorry.
Good evening. The rules of the Citizens Review Board are as follows. Please silence all electronic devices. The duties and responsibilities of the Citizens Review Board are to review completed department investigations involving the use of force and cases of importance and interest to the community or the city. Determine whether the disposition of reviewed cases was consistent with department policies and procedures. Review matters of importance or interest and make recommendations regarding the handling of these matters. Determine whether any revisions or additions to department policy and procedures are appropriate in reviewing matters of or importance or interest, and report findings and recommendations to the mayor and chief of police. Cases that are brought before the Citizens Review Board are closed internal affairs cases that have been investigated and brought to the police chief for disposition. It is the Citizens Review Board's job to review the cases and render an opinion as to whether the investigation was done according to department policies and procedures. The Citizens Review Board members are provided the investigative files in advance of the meeting. The Citizens Review Board will hear from the department whenever matters of importance or interest are requested for review by the board or the department. The coordinator for the board is Captain Patrick Mesmer. Any person who wishes to make a complaint concerning a matter which may be considered by the Professional Standards Bureau should see Captain Mesmer for information on how to file a complaint. The board should not discuss matters where the city or the department may likely be a party in litigation.
Thank you, Corporal. We'll now move to the approval of the minutes from the meeting of June 28, 2022. Are there any questions or provisions?
Sorry.
Move to approve.
A second.
Board Member Irene Guy has made a motion to approve the minutes of the Tuesday, June 28, 2022 meeting. Board Member Corporal DJ Reyes has seconded the motion of the approval of the minutes of the Tuesday, June 28, 2022 meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the public comment portion of our meeting. Are there any participants signed in for the public comment?
First person signed in is James Shaw.
Yes. If you will, Vice Chair, if you can go over the public comment rules.
So the public comment rules are as follows. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes in speech. As required by the policy, speakers will announce their full name and address. This is for the benefit of the clerk who's taken minutes. Speakers may only speak once. Speakers may not yield their time. Comments should be limited to matters related to the Tampa Police Department. Comments should not be made regarding ongoing professional standards cases. Comments shall be directed to the board as a whole and not to an individual member.
Thank you, sir. If you will, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, and I have a lot to cover. I don't think 3 minutes is going to do it, but I will be in the room, and if you have questions about anything I have to say, happy to answer them. So let me get to it because I'm limited on time. First, the crime-free multi-housing program. You do have authority to investigate that and to make recommendations to the chief of police under section 18-8G6, and you should. It was a program that led to hundreds of evictions. It had a disproportionate impact. 91% of the evictions were African Americans. It was probably designed that way by the architects of this program. It was designed by a right-wing think tank in Arizona in the early 1990s. How exactly was this able to happen? How was the police department able to institute this program that had such an impact without running it by anybody? You can investigate that. Look also at their efforts to kind of influence policy on city council with relation to that, and make sure that you can make recommendations to make sure that that doesn't happen again. What it really brought me here, though, was the policy proposals that are in front of this board. I don't know why they were brought in front of this board, because this is not a policy-making entity. It's an investigative entity. But you were asked at the last meeting to vote on whether or not to have a quote-unquote full-time attorney. Whoever told you that that was what was in front of City Council did not tell you correctly. What's in front of City Council is a proposal to ask the voters if they want to change the city charter to allow that to happen, because City Council had been told that the charter didn't allow it. So it is a voter referendum, not a decision that this board is making. And let me explain why you would want an independent attorney. A couple of weeks ago, the city settled the case of the estate of Arthur Green Jr. in a lawsuit arising out of his death in police custody. Do you know who defended that? The city attorney's office. The city attorney's office can't advise this board, for instance, on that issue as to how to go out and get information that might cause the city to incur liability if it were overturned, or if it were turned up, because that creates a conflict of interest. On the one hand, the city attorney has to protect the city from liability. This board's job is to go out and find the truth, whether it hurts or helps the city liability-wise. Those missions can conflict, and that's why it's best practice and recommended by NACOL that there be an independent attorney. As for subpoena power, I want to be clear, subpoenas cannot be issued to police officers. It's against state law. Even if you were given that power, you couldn't use it for police officers. Here's what it's for. It's for if there is a doorbell camera or a dashboard camera by a civilian who catches footage of something happening, and that's not in the internal affairs file, how would you ever see it? Should it turn on whether or not that person feels like giving it to you or not? There are people who believe that backing the blue means to protect police officers from the consequences of their own actions. Should it turn on whether or not that person feels like they want you to see it or not? Let me tell you who can issue subpoenas: the Human Rights Board, the Code Enforcement Board, the Code Enforcement Special Magistrate. I'm an attorney, and I could issue a subpoena over a scratch on a car and how it got there. But something as important as whether or not the police have exceeded and abused the authority given to them to shoot and use force against people is not important enough for a subpoena. It's not a believable argument. But still, it's really not a decision for this board to make. You're being manipulated into voting to tell City Council, please don't ask the voters whether or not they want to vote on this. That's what you're being asked to do. No one's explaining that to you, so I came here to explain that to you. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer your questions, but I wanted to make sure that those things were explained to you adequately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Next name on the list is David Samanoff. Please approach the podium, state your name, address.
Hi, my name is David Siminoff. I live in Tampa at 307 South Bungalow Park Avenue. I am also honored to be the president of the Greater Tampa chapter of the ACLU of Florida. I'm here to share a bit of information that we've shared with the City Council and then talk about what that information means. About a year ago, the ACLU commissioned, we didn't do it ourselves, we commissioned a poll that asked people what their thoughts were about what the CRB's powers should be. And 68% of the people that we reached said, now this is a representative sample done, by a polling agency, agreed that the CRB should have access to its own attorney so that it does not have to rely upon attorney on the city's payroll to get legal advice. 82% said that if people, 82% said that they want the people of Tampa to vote on what powers the CRB is able to have, and 74% said that the CRB should be able to subpoena information and witnesses. And I will hand this over to the clerk after this, but the numbers are clear, and I think what I want to talk about is what this means. I think the people of Tampa trust you. They're looking up to you. They want a degree of accountability and transparency, and they believe that you can deliver it. What the people of Tampa are saying is that we would like to have a referendum. We would like to be able to vote on giving you those powers. We trust you to use them. And quite frankly, those powers would make your ability to provide transparency and report back to the people of Tampa easier and better and more powerful. So what's going on is that there hopefully will be a voter referendum. The voters will decide whether or not you all should have more power and authority to be able to do your job well, basically the right tools in your toolbox. And when that happens, you might be able to have more power, more tools to do what you're trying to do. But once again, people in the city of Tampa said they want to vote on this, and I hope that you obey their wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next name on the list, Noah Myers. If you will, approach the podium, state your name, state your address for the record.
Apologies. I was led to believe that that was just a sign-in sheet. I did not actually submit for public comment.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, you're welcome anyway.
Unfortunately, I do not have anything to say.
Thank you. Next name on the public comment sign-in sheet would be Jaden Sherman. If you will, approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
All right, so Jaden Sherman, I live in Sarasota, Florida. So let me just start by saying, I may not live in Tampa, though the issues in Tampa Bay do still affect me, and I wish to have a say in them to better help the people in Tampa. So I'll be talking about holding Tampa Police Department accountable for its actions. There's currently on the board an 18.5% raise for Tampa Bay Police Department. Currently, they get paid $60,000 to $98,000 for most rank and file officers, which is higher than a lot of other public servants, like firefighters in Tampa Bay. Now, firefighters are not embroiled in as many scandals as Tampa Bay Police Department has been. Just last year, there was investigations into Tampa Bay Police Department in the use of their police funds for strippers, alcohol, and gold teeth bought for the officers. They also shot a dog recently in the attempt of arresting someone and refused to call the veterinarian to aid the animal. So I do not believe that an organization that regularly abuses its power should receive that raise, and those funds can be better used to serve our community. Those funds could go to creating housing that is affordable to the lowest socioeconomic status individuals within your community. It could go to increasing public transit, and we demand that landlords within Tampa are not allowed to evict tenants over arrests. That is not something they should be allowed to do. It is an overreach of their authority. And I believe give me one moment.
If you will, please, you can come to some type of conclusion. You're already over your 3-minute time limit.
Okay.
If you will,
I
please.
yield my time then.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Next name on the list is Peyton Hughes. Peyton Huey. If you will, approach the podium, state your name and your address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Peyton Hoey, and I live in 5234 Tennis Court Circle, Temple Terrace. And I am a proud member of the Tampa Tenants Union. Tonight, I am here to condemn the racist and backwards crime-free multi-housing program and its impacts that continue to harm the working class people here in Tampa. So according to the Tampa Bay Times analysis, 90% of 1,100 people flagged through the program were Black, and some faced evictions for crimes they didn't even convict. While Tampa Police Department claimed the program was made to target serious crimes, some renters, including entire families who did not commit any crimes, were evicted because a housemate had been arrested for panhandling and petty theft. This is unacceptable and blatant racism. TPD notifies landlords for arrests that happen in other parts of the city, for misdemeanor arrests, and for shoplifting, which again have no impact on the safety of our neighborhoods. These are working class people struggling to keep up with the rising cost of living, inflation, and economic hardship. Yet on top of this, they are burdened with housing insecurity and evictions. Alerting landlords about arrests disregards our basic rights and ignores that we are innocent until proven guilty. This program also punishes entire families when a single person allegedly committed a crime, including children and other family members who did not have their names on the lease. This program and its impacts are the real threat to our community. Landlords have already begun to add terms to leases that include arrests as a reason for eviction. This is completely unjust and irresponsible, as it threatens the lives of so many without due process. True crime-free housing only exists when housing is a guaranteed human right and in a society that prioritizes the health and well-being of people and the planet over profits. This wouldn't put people in the position to resort to crime in order to survive and would truly protect us all. The Tampa Tenants Union demands the defunding of TPD and an introduction of a public approval process in any policy changes they make. It is the public who will face the brunt of their decisions, and we deserve to be heard. Furthermore, the consequences of the program will continue to damage our communities if left untreated. The City Council needs to pass a law and make it illegal for landlords to evict tenants based on arrests. We encourage the Citizens Review Board to recommend this ordinance to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoey. Next name on the list is Sean O'Laughlin. You will approach the podium. State your name and address for the record.
Sean O'Loughlin, 1340 North Clearview Drive is where I tentatively live, in Tampa, 33607. I'm currently homeless right now, and I know I'm supposed to have this thing about the police. I refuse to have this thing about the police. I refuse. I stand up for the people who protect and serve our city and all those who protect and serve our cities across the country and planet. That said, I stand and speak for the truth, and I want to just generally extend my sympathies and regards for those who protect and serve. There's a lot of divisiveness that's being spread by the my so-called deep state, artificial divisiveness that's unnecessary. And this needs to be said, that there's a lot of conflict that does not need to be, because there is an enemy that is active at the very, very top levels. And there needs to be much less conflict. There needs to be the open door to truth revealed, to understanding. Okay? I'm sorry I didn't bone up on a lot of the issues that are on the agenda, but this is relevant. There needs to be some peace. Okay? Some truth revealed. Because I've had relatives that are in the police force and in the fire department that have been shot and killed in other cities elsewhere. My heart goes out to the person that was killed, cut up and killed with a machete. There needs to be some activism, and I'm not one of those so-called leftards. I speak for the truth. The truth is the truth. And there needs to be a lot less, there needs to be more understanding. with, and I'm also follow Scientology. And there's a lot of waking uppingness. That's not very good English, but I'm sorry. But there's a lot of truth and a lot of waking up, and a lot of subversive anti-police groups are taking advantage of this to their own advantage. And this needs to stop. Both sides need to stand up for the truth. Agreed? And I'm lousy at time. Keep track of time for me.
If you will, please continue to
How much time do I have?
Your 3 minutes has expired.
Okay.
Come to some
My word
conclusion.
put in. Thank you very much, people.
Thank you, Mr. Laughlin. I believe that will conclude the public. Okay. Thank you. Simone Rave, if you will, approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Simon Rowe. I live at 9606 North 12th Street, area code 33612. And I'm here to speak about the power of subpoena. I'm speaking in support of the Citizens Review Board having this power. I think it would help this board be more effective in, doing its job. And I think if more of the public knew about the discussions going on here, more people would turn out and actually be in support. I know there are ideas that this 82% number by the ACLU survey isn't enough evidence, but I think if the public knew, if there was more media reporting, you would see even more support for power subpoena or independent counsel, but that was last meeting. And I think strengthening the CRB here today would be good for stopping programs in their tracks, like their crime-free housing program, because these things matter. I know Tampa luckily doesn't have some of the more vile murder cases across the country. I mean, except for Jonas Joseph, of course, kind of like Jalen Walker up in Ohio. I mean, these cases do happen here. We just downplay them. And I think it's important that we raise awareness about them and that they are treated, because the public does know about them, the families know about them, and they need to have trust that something can be done. And right now that trust isn't being strengthened when, the CRB can't do anything about it, where it's treated as some sort of public relations board for the police and not something that earns the trust of the community, So honestly, I want to see a Citizens Review Board that has the power to subpoena and has the power to make positive changes for this community, which is what the CRB should serve, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Next on the list is David Jones. If you will, approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Cool. My name's David Jones, 9606 North 12th Street. I'm just speaking out against the crime-free multi-housing program. This program we saw affected 1,100 people, with 90% of those people being black. That's over 1,000 people. That's over 1,000 families first. These families do have multiple people in them, so that's well over 2,000 folks being hit by that crime-free program, 2,000 folks whose lives are being changed by that program. So if this board can, I would ask that y'all take action against that program and continue to, fight to prevent programs like that that do inherently end up targeting black folks from occurring. We saw this program be used especially harsh at Robles Park over in in East Tampa, a predominantly black apartment complex in a predominantly black neighborhood. And we've seen how that's hurt those folks over there, and we're seeing how that program has only led to continued harm coming to those folks, whether it be through those folks getting kicked out in their apartment complex continuing to not be maintained by both HUD and Housing Authority, by those folks being moved out of their apartments come December who aren't being given the right assistance because they keep getting evicted prematurely because of these odd programs, kind of echoing the last speaker on the power to subpoena. As far as I know, this board was made after the Biking While Black incident that happened here under former Mayor Bob Buckhorn, where, we saw TPD actively over-policing black folks on their bikes. The goal was to prevent that from happening in the future, and clearly that hasn't happened while we had this Renting While Black incident come to light this past year. So I do think getting this board a little stronger so that they can actually help out folks in the community, so that they can actually, make the real change that I know y'all want to make is good. Folks voted for this board when it first opened up. It's why half of this board, is appointed by City Council. Why we have that NAACP rep on this board, because we're expecting y'all folks to stand up for black folks, who these problems are facing, who are being over-policed, who are needing this board to, take a stand to make sure that what needs to be done is getting done. So getting those powers of subpoena, continuing to fight so that y'all can get the power to more strongly investigate to more strongly investigate Tampa police, so that y'all can get the power to make some real change over this policing system would be swell and something I would like to see personally. Yeah, that's my time.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Next on the list is Ali Abdel Kadir. If you will, approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Ali Abdelkader. I live at 5234 Tennis Court Circle. I'm a new resident of Tampa, and I just want to echo what a lot of other speakers have spoken about today on the crime-free multi-housing program. I was really disappointed to hear about this, with it specifically targeting black people, with 90% of the 1,100 people flagged in this program being black. I have experience with a program that's very similar to that. It's let me continue. It's what happens in Israel. It's how the Israeli army retaliates against Palestinians who, someone in the family has committed a crime. Not only do they evict the entire family, they demolish the house. This is a key part of Israeli apartheid in the occupied territories, and it's very disappointing to me to see, TPD sort of emulate that model. It's well known that TPD and a lot of other police departments in this country train with the IDF, because the IDF is an occupation army, occupying a colonized people. And we're seeing it happen here. We're seeing the Tampa police basically acting as an occupying force against black residents here in Tampa. And it's extremely disappointing to see, especially when, TPD gets funded more year after year after year, while the very things that trap people in cycles of poverty, a lack of investment in education, a lack of basic necessities being available and being, affordable to people, like housing. Those kind of programs aren't prioritized. Instead, what is prioritized is funding the police to deal with the problems that are created by this broken system that we have, this broken system that creates these broken people that we have to keep funding the police to solve. So I'm here with the Tampa Tenants Union, and I'm here to demand the defunding of TPD, the bringing of funding into social programs, the introduction of a public approval process in any policy changes that TPD makes, and I'm here to encourage the Citizens Review Board to recommend to City Council to make it illegal for landlords to evict tenants based off of arrests. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's going to conclude the podium public comment portion. Did we receive any voicemails?
Chair, Mike Schmidt on behalf of the City Attorney's Office, and I did check our voicemail. We did get a voicemail. The voicemail couldn't be played due to the setup of this where we're at tonight, but I did have it transcribed, and I will let you know what it said. It was from a Christina Beamond. She is on the CIP, the Civilian Investigative Panel with the City of Miami. She called in support of establishing the CRB for the City of Tampa. She advocates for allowing an independent counsel for the law department to avoid potential conflict. She said CRB may uncover information that may reveal liability for the city. She said if a city attorney represents a board, it would create a conflict for them to encourage transparency involved in such material. She advocates for subpoena power. She says currently officers cannot be subpoenaed, but Miami has found it useful to use subpoenas to get surveillance camera material. She says most recently she felt that a subpoena for camera material was useful for an officer who is accused of double dipping when he was working both with the city and the private employer, and she provided a phone number for which he could be reached at. That was the only recorded comment that we received.
Thank you, Mike Schmidt. Any written documentation for public comment? Any written letters? Okay, that would conclude the public comment portion of this agenda. We will now continue. I'd like to applaud those who participated in public comment, your views and opinions to the board will be taken into consideration. I'd like to open up the board for anyone that would like to make a comment or statement or concern in reference to the public comment that we heard here today. I will open the floor.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question of one of the public commenters? Or may I ask a question to one of the public commenters?
If that's what.
Yeah, so that commentary is okay. I would like to ask Mr. Shaw. Mr. Shaw, what's the benchmark for validated signatures?
I'm sorry?
What's the benchmark for validated signatures to get something onto the ballot for a voter's referendum?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 10% of the amount of people that voted on the last election or through the ordinance process. The charter allows for the City Council to pass an ordinance that then places a referendum question onto the ballot, which is what's being discussed. So
okay, and
not the signature process, but that process.
So 10% of the registered voters who voted in the last election?
Off the top of my head, I think that's what it is.
And do you know whether there's something afoot now to gain signatures for?
To my knowledge, there's not. That's a very expensive process, and it's much less expensive than City Council voting to put a question in front of the voters that 82% of the voters want put in front of them.
So the only way that changes could be made is through a voters referendum?
There's an easy way and a very, very difficult way. So it's not the the only way to change the charter. To bring back to the history of it, the City Council was told by the City Attorney's Office, and I don't think that they were right. to be candid, but they were told that it is not possible to give this board subpoena power, even though the Human Rights Board has it and the Code Enforcement Board has it and the Code Enforcement Magistrate has it, and that the city charter would need to be amended. They were also told that an independent attorney wasn't possible, even though the Human Rights Board has an independent attorney, a part-time independent attorney, by the way, unless the charter is amended. Now, I don't think either of those things are correct, but that's what City Council was told, and so when the changes were made by ordinance, part of that conversation was later on when we have a charter review workshop, we'll talk about putting those in front of the voters. So there is a much more difficult way to do it, but so that this isn't the only way to do it, but this is the path of least resistance.
Okay. Mr. Shaw, the Code Enforcement Board and the Civil Rights, I'm sorry, what's the name of the other board?
The Human Rights Board.
The Human Rights Board, those are investigative boards, correct? Agencies. The Code Enforcement is an investigative.
Sure, it is, yeah.
And that board is an investigative. I don't believe the CRB is an investigative.
Well, if it isn't, then it should be. This should be a board that should be able to look not only under the rocks that are looked under by the Professional Standards Bureau, but also should be able to talk to people that they didn't talk to look at surveillance camera footage that they didn't look at. This board's job is to come to the truth and assure the public that the result reached by the Professional Standards Board is, in fact, the correct result. And if this board can't inspire that confidence of the public, if it's not able to look where the Professional Standards Bureau didn't look, not able to talk to the people that it didn't talk to. That's why it's necessary. So whether you call that investigative or not is of no moment to me. This board's purpose is to look at the conclusions reached by the Professional Standards Bureau and assure the public that they can trust that result.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
I wanted to ask Mr. Shaw a question. Yeah, I was trying to tell you to stay up there, Mr. Shaw. The survey that you mentioned,
yes.
and let me precedent my question with, as a board, we were appointed by mayor and city council. And so we are citizens review board, and we should be listening to what the citizens are saying. We too have had a survey to make sure that we hear. So my question to you, because I heard the comments here, I've heard the comments, otherwise I've seen them publicly published, and there's a lot of concern that this board should have a council, they should have subpoena power, and I understand that's the community's concern. I think it's our role as the board with our support staff from the city to make sure that not only do we look at it, but if we're not pursuing that, as was just asked, then it would be time for us to give the appropriate education to the citizens, because we represent the citizens via the appointment by people who elected those individuals. You did a survey. That survey showed a significant number of people that you indicated wanted us to have those two entities that you made reference to. How many, and that's what I even looked at, and before you answer me, thank you. Thank you for the information that you did send, because it was information for us to dig, to review, and to try to understand it as well. And it's sometimes so great to have two different positions so that we have something to look at. But how many was in that survey? Can you remember?
The number is in my email to you. Off the top of my head, it was, how many? 590, that sounds like the right number, yeah. And those were 590 people who voted in the 2020 election, and that was citywide. It was not, those weren't primary voters, or those weren't voters in a particular area. That was citywide. So those are all voters.
And that was for the city of Tampa, not Hillsborough? Did it just cover the city of Tampa?
Correct.
Okay.
Chair, I was going to hold my comments and ask to make a motion to move 9 to 7, but we're already into this, so I think that I will go ahead and make my comments at the end of this time.
Oh, okay. No, she was asking another question. And the only other thing is, there's a wealth of information you have on the two issues that you did mention, and that was the multi-housing, crime-free apartment complex, and that was something that we formally mentioned. And then you also mentioned the independent counsel and the subpoena power. if in the near future, I won't say distance because we don't know what the city council is going to do, but if in the future some of those documents could be brought forth, and if this board felt they needed to have more information, is it any kind of way that you could do a workshop so that we can look at the information too? So I saw something that had 665 pages of emails or whatever, and I was just trying to look at one, and we have very good support from the city, but it's good to have two separate views.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, and I'd be happy to help with digesting it because I know it's a lot.
Thank you. That's all.
Anyone else need to talk to me? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Irene Guy.
Sure.
And I'm going to read my comments because I've spent a lot of time looking at the information that you sent us. But thank you for wanting to be active with us because we've been asking for people to join us for a long time. We received a letter from you, and yes, I was one of the board members that questioned the poll. You didn't mention me by name, but I knew it was me. I was not given the information regarding who did the poll, but regardless, I would have had the same questions. I personally read through each question with a very small number of people that had no background or little knowledge regarding the CRB. I actually received higher percentage on questions 3, 4, 5, and 6 of agree. But let me be clear, these people had no real knowledge of the CRB or what any of this actually meant. Question 3, in my humble opinion, led the way by stating the CRB investigates. We do not investigate complaints of police misconduct. You set a stage there for the rest of the questions. According to the ordinance, we are tasked with reviewing closed investigations of the internal investigators, matter of importance or interest to the public, and make recommendations. That is in the ordinance. The city of Tampa has about 400,000 residents, and you polled 590. When we did ours, we got about 600. It is hard to poll people, but I believe your questions were very leading. I believe if you took an unbiased look at what I have presented, you can understand the concern that we had as a board. The next issue that is that it appears that the CRB was not provided very much information. My understanding is that the changes are still being workshopped, and yes, the members of this board should be part of the workshop, all of those interested. My question would be, who is making this proposal to make changes to the charter, to the city council, and what are they, whoever they may be, proposing when the executive order did not pass, for the most part, by the city council around May 2021? You, as of the ACLU, said, but the ACLU says the changes to the CRB are not meaningful. This is when our friends from the NAACP were able to appoint a member. I'm not sure what else passed, but the subpoena power and having our own attorney did not.
Well, because the city attorney's office advised city council that it wasn't possible for them to do that, that the charter needed to be changed. So when the time comes to do that, now blinks are happening. But the discussion at the time was the city council does not have the power to vest this board with subpoena authority or with an independent attorney.
And the city attorney, that was their opinion. And your opinion is opposed to that.
My opinion is that that's not correct.
That's two attorneys opposing opinions, which happens a lot.
It does.
But last meeting, the CRB had a couple of motions, as it appears in the minutes. One motion was to recommend full independent counsel and the ability to issue subpoenas. It failed. The next motion was to continue as is motion carried 6-2. Then a motion was made to table the discussion, which was a tie vote, and the assistant attorney moved it to tonight's agenda. But we technically did vote at the last meeting not to support those two issues. That was a 6-2 vote, and it is in the minutes that way.
I haven't read the minutes. I did watch the video, and I watched Mr. Schmidt advise this board that what the board was voting on was whether or not there should be a quote-unquote full-time attorney. That is not what anyone's talking about.
That is not what my motion was. I made the motion.
Okay,
And
well,
it was voted on, and it was passed 6-2.
If it was past 6-2, it was, and I watched some board members change their minds. Oh, we're talking about a full-time attorney. Well, then that's different.
That was in the discussion.
It was.
I would suggest that maybe he needs a copy of the minutes.
Well,
And that would work out really well.
I watched the entire meeting, and I watched that
we were
discussion.
here.
So,
So,
right.
yes.
So then you know that.
But
that
my
full-time-
motion had nothing to do with what you're saying. We did have that discussion.
Right. I watched the board not want to vote on the issue, and then Mr. Schmidt leaned on the board and said, "But this could be your last chance.
Well,
Do you
I
want a
don't believe
full-time
that to
attorney
be
or not?"
true.
And then there was the vote.
That would be your opinion that
It's
Mr.
on video.
Schmidt meant pushed us to make a decision. He advises us. He doesn't push us to make decisions. But it would appear, Mr. Shaw, that you have access to the whole charter proposal, and you might want to share it with us. We apparently don't have it. And the other part that we've talked about many times is that, investigations done by Internal Affairs, if there is any indication that there is during the investigation, if there is any conflict, there are other agencies that can get involved with the police department, and specifically the FDLE. They can get involved in any of this. And I would just say to you that I've been on this board from its inception, and I have never, and I mean never, asked anyone at the police department or the attorney's office for information that I did not receive. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the board. There are members on this board who've been on the board from the very beginning, just like I have. But I would ask you to look at your question and honestly tell me that if I read a question to you that said the Tampa Citizens Review Board investigates complaints of police misconduct, and then you go on with the other questions, what would you think?
I would think that this is a board that reviews closed investigations to assure the public that the result was one that was sound, and in order to do that, they need to review information that maybe was not reviewed by the Professional Standards Bureau. But I believe you that you say that they've never denied a request for information, but they can only give you what is theirs to give you. What they cannot do is go take from a private citizen video camera surveillance footage or financial records and turn them over to this committee. But with a subpoena, you can retrieve that. And that was what the message from the chair of the Civilian Investigatory Panel in Miami was saying.
I don't want to say that that is not correct, but I do believe through Nextdoor, the police department does request videos from citizens.
And they can say no.
That's correct.
With a subpoena, they cannot. They have to turn over a copy.
Okay, well, how would I know Susie Smith had a video? I wouldn't. But I would ask you to go back to this question because you sort of skirted around it. Your question says, we investigate complaints of police misconduct. If you go back and look at our guiding rules, that is not what we are here for. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I disagree that there's a huge difference between reviewing and investigating, but at the bottom line is if there is information that would determine that a result reached by the Professional Standards Bureau was or was not the correct result, that I can't understand why any member of this board would not want to see surveillance footage that would either confirm that the result was correct or disaffirm that the result was correct if it's there and it can be seen. I don't understand why anyone would want to keep that out of the reach of this board.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Any other questions before I sit down?
And just to concur with Ms. Guy, as displayed in the minutes, a motion was made by Ms. Guy, second by Mr. Irvin, to continue with the current ordinance and not implement the change of having independent counsel. The motion did carry 6-2, with Collins and Valdez voting no in the absence of Mr. Banks, Reverend Banks. So just to concur with the minutes. The only motion that was tabled was the motion of the discussion of having the ability of issuing subpoena power. And that discussion will be held here tonight. And that was a 4-4 vote as well. So we'll continue with the agenda. Is there any other board members that would like to respond in reference to the public comment that we heard here tonight? Mr. Valdez.
Good evening. I don't have a question per se, but I just want to thank everybody that came out to talk to us and Mr. Shaw for putting the information and emailing it to us in a timely manner. So again, I appreciate you all for coming out, and this is our first meeting out in the communities. Thank you for everybody that made this happen. I know it was a lot of work in the city part to get everyone out here and televise and whatnot, so thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. That would conclude item 6 on the agenda. We would now move with the agenda to items to be reviewed. I understand, Ms. Guy, you wanted to state a motion in reference to moving an item on the agenda. Do you still wish to do so?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm good. Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll continue with the agenda items to be reviewed. Tonight we'll be reviewing case 18R-001. Yes, Ms. Dr. Collins, if you will.
As we prepare to review this case, I just want to ask a question. I've asked this question, it's the second time I've asked it with the case. This is a case where the students came to about 3 meetings back to back and asked, and we indicated to them that we could not respond to this case because it had not been, a decision had not been made. And once the decision was made, they would be notified so that they would be at the meeting when the presentation was made. My then question, and I saw this when I kind of got in the depth of the case, and I'm sorry that I didn't take the time, but I just assumed that they had been notified. So are we still following that protocol where we promised the public that we would notify them when a case come up, and were they notified of this case? And am I wrong? I might be wrong. Somebody else on the board who was here too might remember.
Kamaria Pettis-Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office. I was not aware that citizens came before and made public comment on this particular case. So the agenda was posted and made available. I did not particularly notify anyone because I wasn't aware that there was public comment previously on this case. So.
But this case is included in the agenda that's sent out to the public.
Correct.
In advance of this meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to say this now for the board. Thank you, Attorney. If we say to the community we're going to do something, we need to do it. We were the one decided that they too would be notified. A previous case came up like this, and we pulled it because the individual had not been notified. We notified that individual, and they was at the meeting, and it was presented. I'm not indicating, but our current counselor here was not here when that was made, and we may too have forgotten it when we pulled the case. I'm just concerned because these was the students. I know they were at USF. They may not even be in Tampa anymore, but they was relatives, and they came about 3 months in a row. And no 2 months they came up and they mentioned this case, and we said that once a finding was made that we would come back. And I agree with it, the agenda being noticed. I wish I had kind of picked up that deadly force case even earlier myself when I was reading it, but I was reading so much this past month of what we had. I'm sorry that I missed it. And if we're going to present it tonight, I want to publicly apologize now to those individuals. They may not even be in Tampa anymore. They may be gone. But if that's what we're going to do, we need to find a way to tag these cases so that when they do come up, and we've asked that this be done, so when the cases come up, we need to make sure that we're notifying them. And if I am wrong, I stand to be corrected. I would ask board members that were on the board at that time, if I'm misstating it, to please correct me now.
Would you willing to pass the microphone? Just to concur with Dr. Collins, that statement is correct. I had this particular case on my radar, and that was one of the reasons why I selected it, because it was completed, and as far as the investigation, that's one of the reasons I pulled it. I could have advised our new counsel of the arrangement. However, I also expected once this case was part of our selection, the comments and statements that we put forth in reference to the community to have them present would have been done so. But since then, we have changed counsel. I think it was Mr. Shaw was representing us at that time, if not mistaken. However, we do have this case on our agenda tonight. It's up to the board members whether we would like to continue or continue with our earlier commitment. I'll leave that open to the board. If you will, Ms. Guy.
Do we know, I mean, I can go back on my minutes, but do we know who the names of the people that were, you know, it's been several months ago.
Yes.
Would we have a way of knowing who they were? I mean, that would be, I mean, it would be a reason to postpone it if we know who they are, but if we can't determine who the public speakers were.
Do we log the public comment sign-in sheets? If so, if we do log it, that should be an indicator to be able to identify those individuals.
It's most likely on the minutes. It most likely is on the minutes, and as you know, the CRB meetings at Old City Hall would have been recorded, so I think you could go, I think there's a way to identify.
Do we know what month it was, Carolyn?
To be honest with you, I remember the last case because that individual had made a contact with me. These young ladies, and it was 3 of them, I remember them, that came to the meetings. I cannot remember their names. I think it was almost a year or so ago. It was a long time. Our current legal counsel, this is not you. This, more than anything, it may be us, because maybe even I should have seen it. And so I'm going to go ahead and say this. I read the case. I don't want to say what my position is with the case, you know, at this point. But if we want to go ahead and if we can find out who they are and at least send them the findings. I'm sure by now they know the findings, but I just want to make sure that we stay true to what we say that we're doing. And I wanted to precedent the presentation. I'm not against the presentation. It gave me more insight than what we got with them when they came because we couldn't speak to them. But I just want to make sure that maybe we need to assist in making sure that when a case like this come up, and I don't know how many other ones we had, but this is, as soon as I saw it, I remember the case. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not saying, Mr. Chair, to hold it up, and I'm not even asking the board if that's your decision to do. I'm just saying that let's try to be cognizant of what we've said and kind of follow it.
Agree. Any other board members wish to make a statement or concern in reference to this case being being reviewed tonight, or tabling this case to the next month if we can get notification? The chair is open. If not, we will continue with the agenda. Hearing none, Captain Messmer, please continue.
Thank you again, Captain Patrick Messmer, Tampa Police Professional Standards Bureau. So this case that we're reviewing tonight, it was a officer-involved shooting that occurred back on February 10th, 2018. We had a group of officers who responded to address in our District 2 area on Marby Avenue. The 911 callers advised that a family member who had a machete had been threatening family members, chasing them around. Our officers arrived. Most of the family members had already left the residence. The individual who had the machete, Mr. Richardson, he had fled back into the residence with his niece. Our officers were able to obtain a spare key to the house, and they were able to gain entry into the house. Our officers made entry into the residence, and they were attempting to establish a dialogue with Mr. Richardson, who had locked himself in a bedroom with the teenage niece. Mr. Richardson was not engaging in any dialogue. The niece was not engaging in any dialogue. The officers felt that there was a very good potential at that point that maybe she had been stabbed. They felt in fear for her life, so they decided to breach the door of the bedroom after they were unsuccessful in establishing dialogue with them. At the point that the door was breached, Mr. Richardson was able to see the officers. He began to raise the machete over his head in what was described as a fighting stance, a combat stance, and he started to approach the officers. One of our officers attempted to use the taser on Mr. Richardson. The taser was ineffective. It only struck him with one probe. You need to have 2 probes actually hit to be effective. So the taser was not effective. He kept approaching the officers with the machete over his head in a threatening position, at what point one of our officers fired rounds from the firearm, which caused Mr. Richardson's death. So our detectives responded out there. They interviewed the responding officers, the family members on the scene. The state attorney's office also responded out there to conduct their joint investigation. And that was, let me see, about 2 weeks after that, the state attorney's office wrote a clearance letter. State Attorney Warren advised that after the office's review, they determined that the actions of our officer were justified under the relevant facts of the law, and no criminal charges should be filed. And the disposition letter of the case was written by Captain Flynn, who is now retired. She also found no violation of the department policy or procedure in reference to this unfortunate incident.
So did Mr. Richardson have any prior violent crimes?
Not that I'm aware of.
No priors. And was the staff aware of any mental illness that Mr. Richardson suffered from?
Yeah, there was a mention in the 911 call that he did suffer from mental illness.
And what is the necessary training, or what is the necessary team would come out to respond to an individual in a possible violent situation, a possible hostage situation that has mental illness? I know we had a presentation in reference to autism and things of that nature. What is the training, what is the protocol in reference to receiving a call on 911 prior to responding that this individual had mental illness?
Well, it's a little bit of a different question, because in a situation like this really the only difference between this and a gun is really the weapon. So this would be looked at as an active, kind of like an active shooter. It's a potential active violence incident. This is somebody who is threatening people with a deadly weapon and who has barricaded themselves with a deadly weapon and a hostage. And if there is time, and if it's a person in crisis by themselves, even if they're armed with a weapon, if there's nobody else in danger, it's a much different situation. So we do have a behavioral health unit that will, they're specifically trained to deal with people in crisis. They're specifically trained they have co-responders and address people in mental illness and in crisis. But when you're talking about somebody who has a weapon and is actually swinging that weapon at people, trying to hurt them, that is going to be a police response to somebody with a weapon. We talk a lot about active shooters in schools and workplaces and things. Pretty much all of them have mental illness, but those active shooters still need to be met with deadly force. So in this situation, the only reason that the door was breached was because there was just no dialogue. These officers tried for a couple minutes to establish dialogue. Hey, are you okay? Tell us you're okay. Come out. I mean, if they had said something to let them know that they were okay, the officers probably would not have breached that door and would have engaged in that dialogue. That we would have called out the crisis negotiation team, and we would have engaged in dialogue with them, indefinitely. But you can only engage in dialogue so long without getting a response, and you have to assume if you're not getting any response, that person he could have killed his niece, and she could have been lying there, seriously injured or dead, bleeding out on the floor, and the officers have to go in there and try to render aid to them. So if there had been dialogue, there might have been a different outcome to this. But at some point, when you have a situation like this and you have, an innocent person in danger and somebody who's known to have a weapon and has been trying to use that weapon on people, at a certain point, you just have to make entry to make sure those people are okay. And at the point in this case, when they made entry, that's when he came with the officers with the weapon. So that's kind of the difference between a situation where you actually have somebody armed with a weapon making threats against somebody else than a typical 911 call of a person in crisis. And, we might have some more time to back out and engage in dialogue, if that person is receptive to dialogue. So, in a situation like this where we have someone who's calling 911 because they have a family member swinging a machete at people and taking hostages, that's going to be a normal patrol response. Anybody else who would be able to get up there would get up there as well. But that's considered one of the highest priority calls we can go to, because regardless of the mental illness, that person with the knife can still kill somebody.
Got a few, but you want to go ahead? Go ahead and ask your question first. I've got a few.
Okay, Mr. Tamayo.
Captain Mesmer, there was a reference to a visit that Mr. Richardson paid the night before to the District 2 office.
Yes.
Where the officer who took Mr. Richardson outside to speak to him said that he evaluated him for possible involuntary BA 52, which I assume is a Baker Act.
Correct.
And that he determined that he was not a danger to himself or others at the time. So if you could just speak to the kind of training that our officers receive in determining whether a Baker Act is warranted.
Sure. They all receive training. There's training through USF about Baker Acts. There's additional crisis intervention training that officers are receiving involving Baker Acts. It's a pretty large mental illness block in the police academy. There's additional training after that in our holdover program about Baker Acts. So they receive, I would say, at least 80 to 100 hours of training, if not more, on not only Baker Act specifically, but mental illness. And a Baker Act is a very, very strict criteria. They have to be an immediate danger to themselves or someone else, or suffering from self-neglect. So, that call that was referenced, I believe he came to the district because he was questioning the living conditions of the house that they were living in.
That's right.
He was not armed. He didn't want to harm anybody. He didn't want to harm anybody else. So there was really nothing at that point to lead them to believe that he should be Baker Acted. They did have some concerns about his mental health. He did seem like he probably had mental problems. I believe they offered to take him to the VA because he mentioned that.
But there was no immediate concern.
There was no immediate concern. They obviously saw the mental issues. They offered him voluntary treatment. He declined it. There's a lot of people out there who have mental health issues, but unless they are a danger, an immediate danger to themselves or somebody else, we can't just force everybody with mental health issues into involuntary treatment.
Oh, thank you. Now, just getting to the night in question, the officers arrived right before 7 o'clock in the evening, so the sun had already set. It's pretty dark. I just want to establish that they had a clear view of what was happening inside the home. So can we assume, or do we know, in fact, that the lights were on in the home, the lights were on in the bedroom that the officers approached with Mr. Richardson and his niece? So were the lights on? Did the officers have a clear sight of what they were encountering?
Well, I know they didn't have a sight into the house. They had to use a key to open the door to the house. Right.
But when they entered the home, had Mr. Richardson shut off the lights when he barricaded himself in, shut off the lights of the bedroom? Did the officers have a clear sight line of what they were encountering?
At the point, it was from the documents that I saw, it was about a 10-foot bedroom, so it was a relatively small bedroom. And then from the photos that I saw, I believe that the lights were on.
Okay. Were there, well, this was in 2018, so body-worn cameras were not in general use at the time, correct?
No, we only had a handful of officers who had body-worn cameras, so
Right,
there were no
Okay.
videos of this.
In a similar situation now, in July of '22, would all of those officers, or at least the first two approaching officers, would they have had body-worn cameras activated?
Yes.
So that would have been standard, that would be standard procedure now?
Yes, had this happened now, the involved officers would have been wearing body-worn cameras.
Okay, thank you.
Captain Mesmer, how you doing tonight?
Good, sir.
I want to drill down a little bit, excuse me, I want to drill down a little bit on what my esteemed member, Mr. Tamayo, was talking about with regards to him coming to the district and reporting, asking for help for his, I believe, his son. He was concerned about the safety of his son. One of the things that I noted in the statement was he specifically asked for another veteran, and if I'm not mistaken, he asked for another Marine veteran. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Was Police Officer Ramos, was he a Marine veteran?
Yes, I believe that's the reason why he went to speak with him.
Okay, good. And then, if I'm not mistaken, in the statements, I believe it was the day prior or the evening prior, he had an incident at his house which resulted in his cousin going to his house to pick him up. And then when he was there, police were also there because I guess there was a situation with the decedent. And the cousin, I can't recall his name, but he went ahead and he picked him up and he brought him to his house for safekeeping and to basically watch over him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, during the incident, when all of this was happening, and I know it was happening very quickly, if I recall correctly, there were statements made by various police officers who indicated that they were told that that the decedent was a Marine Corps veteran. He probably had PTSD, and I believe in one statement I read, they said that he had flashbacks. So this was kind of known amongst at least several of the officers. What I didn't see, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, please, any of the members or yourself, Captain Mesner, correct me. What I didn't see was the shooter, I believe is Police Officer Hernandez, the shooter. I don't believe he was told or advised before he breached that was a combat veteran, a Marine Corps veteran, that was on the other side of that door. I believe what he was told was there's a person in there dangerous, possibly mental illness, and with a machete.
My understanding is the call, the 911 call that was made, that was all referenced in the 911 call, that he did have PTSD, he was a military veteran. So I believe that everybody who was responding to that should have heard that on the 911 call.
Okay. Okay, that wasn't, when I read it a few times, maybe it's a nuance that I didn't pick up myself. So if that's the case, then I apologize. But it was clear to me from the statements that it was explicitly stated from several statements that he was a veteran, a Marine Corps veteran, had, possibly had PTSD, possibly had flashbacks. So it didn't intuitively jump out at me. I guess the point I'm making, or the question I want to ask you is, if Hernandez, Police Officer Hernandez, or any officer in the position that he was in, if he would have known definitively that was a combat veteran on the other side, possibly with PTSD, going through that condition, what, if any, difference in his behavior, in the procedures being taken, would have been taken, or would he have done the same thing that he did?
I don't really, in this specific case, with the lack of communication, I mean, I know normally if we are trained and part of the mental health training to, recognize the PTSD and especially with veterans, to, use techniques to try to, speak to veterans, because that is something in the veteran community. But again, with this specific situation, with the active threat and with the lack of engagement, I don't think that anything would have been done differently, because the thought of the officers at the time was that the niece was in a pool of blood on the floor and with nobody responding to any questions, commands, they had to breach the door and get in there to make sure that she was okay. So, in this specific case, I don't think it would have made any difference one way or the other. They did have a shield, so, they did take whatever precautions they thought that they needed to take to go in there safely. But, in certain situations, if a veteran's involved and we know that that person has a lot of firearms, that may be approached from a different tactical level. But again, if we think somebody is inside seriously injured or dead, we're going to force entry, and we're just going to do what needs to be done to go in there and ensure they're okay.
During this scenario, when this happened, basically, and I'm asking, this was basically an assault or a breach force that went in for the most part. You didn't have any other service, what we call in the military service support capabilities, like any sort of like mental health professionals or counselors or anything like that, that was augmenting this team based on the situation that was reported, that you have a person who's possibly mentally ill or even a combat veteran with possibly PTSD.
Right, there was we had already called for the negotiators. There were negotiators on the way. The lieutenant who was on scene, again, because they made so many attempts to begin dialogue and there was no dialogue, it became a force and breach situation because they had to go in there and check to see if the niece was okay, because they had a well-found belief that she could be seriously injured on the ground. So to get those resources there and take more time to try to get somebody else there to start dialogue because of the exigencies, the commander on the scene just made the decision to breach the door.
I just thought of this question because of another point that I want to make, and that is, do you recall, because I don't, do you recall in any of the statements if any of the police officers spoke with the young 17-year-old that was being held hostage, basically, asking her if she is okay or if she's being threatened or if she feels threatened? Do you recall?
After the shooting, an officer did,
Before,
but they tried.
during,
They were trying to. That was part of the dialogue. If anybody's in there,
right.
Tell me you're okay. Speak to us. And there was no communication at all coming from that room.
Because following up on what I think you were going to say was, after the fact, the 17-year-old female did state in a statement that she felt that she wasn't threatened. She felt that, in fact, it was the opposite, that even in his state of mind, she felt that he was trying in some way to protect her, and especially with some of the things that he was saying. And then when you read the statements of, as you alluded to earlier, of his defensive fighter stance, the positioning of the machete and where he was standing, in the angle in relation to the breach force and the female, the indications are there, at least to somebody like me reading this, that he was not threatening her. The indications are his physical demeanor was he was looking at the breach force. So that's why I was really curious as to if there was any other indication that I missed on the female, if she yelled out to the police saying that she felt threatened, because I didn't see it, I didn't read it.
No, I mean, in the statement, which is in the report, I'm talking about Sydney Marsh's statement. She was scared and asked to leave, but Sydney wouldn't allow her to leave. So she did say at one point that she was scared of him. But again, if she had spoken up, if he had spoken up, they never would have breached that door. But we didn't know that at that point, that she was okay. She wasn't speaking. So is she okay? They couldn't see through the door. Is she okay? Is she laying in a pool of blood? And they have to make that decision. They have to get in there and see if she's okay. And you're correct. The fighting stance was not toward her. It was toward the officers as soon as the door was breached.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. I think you just hit my last one. With where my questions was. Yes, it was mentioned PTSD. I thought I saw somewhere in there where they was questioning his family whether or not he had taken his medication that day, and that the niece actually addressed she was scared at one point, and that his behavior was worse than she had seen it, that he has had that kind of behavior before. But I think even she referenced that his behavior was somewhat frightening. Again, as stated, she asked to get out, and he wouldn't let her go out the door, but she never responded when they kept, from what we saw in the report, when they kept asking, she did not respond, nor did he respond. The family, I didn't see as much, but the family was all out on the porch. They were, I guess he had locked them out, or they were locked out, but they had the keys, and that's how they gave the officers the keys to get back in the house. But even the family was concerned because apparently he had waved the machete at a couple of family members, and after he was hitting on the table with it, things of that nature. So apparently, whether he was off his medicine, she talked about him talking, you know, out of his head, like she hadn't heard him talk before, that he was talking about the Marines was coming, that somebody was going to attack her, etc. Listening to her say that, the family members that came before us at the CRB meeting in the City Hall, which I think was probably over a year ago. It was right after it happened, so it had to be, if this was in 2018, this had to be maybe shortly after that they came. They gave us a story that is very similar to what we see here, but they told us the niece was in the room without giving the details. This, to me, was more eye-opening. Whether the family who came, and we found out who they were, and we sent them this to let them know there's a disposition. But I think that the focus of the officers that day was for that young lady that was in that room, and they didn't know her status because as they screamed out, she did not respond, just like he did not respond. And she did say she saw the machete when he came in and it was behind his back, and then she saw the machete which was not behind his back. This may sound strange to us, but one of my biggest concerns was we just went through officers that didn't intervene and delayed too long. And I cannot say that I'm not against these officers who thought they were going in to make sure that they was trying to save a life. That's all.
Yes, and you're correct. That was their thought. Their thought was the niece. You know, if he was in there by himself with a machete, we would have been there all night, you know, talking to an empty room. And at some point, we would have used another method other than sending officers in to get into the door and see if he was okay or if he had taken his own life. But it's different when you have a potential hostage.
Question as it relates back to the mental health training. How many hours do the officers receive as it relates to Baker Act?
I mean, specifically to the Baker Act, I don't know that we have a course on the Baker Act. The Baker Act's incorporated into our 40-hour critical intervention training, our, I think, 16-hour training on other mental health conditions. We have additional training that's provided by Grace Point, about 10 hours. And then in the academy, I believe there's 35 to 40 hours also. But I mean, specifically Baker Act is included in all of those blocks, but there's not a specific, you know, Baker Act training block.
Is there ongoing training throughout the year as it relates to Baker Act and mental health?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a bit disappointed in the fact that, you know, the officers responded to, or not the officers, he went to the station the day before and not much was done to be able to address the red flags that were presenting at that time. I know from past experience with the population and the work that I do, when I've called for Baker Acts, we've gotten no response in the sense of, okay, we'll go and check out the scene, but because that youth at that present time that the officer is there, they're not a threat to themselves or any other adult, they won't take them into custody to transport them to a Baker Act. So I really want to make sure that the department, that moving forward and from this instance, they can shed more light and more training and discussion around mental health and issues such as what we see here, because this could have been a tragedy that could have been prevented if that gentleman was taken to custody for Baker Act the night before. So again, more so of a comment that I would like to see more training in place of this magnitude for our officers as it relates to Baker Acts and mental health.
Well, unless the statements that the officers wrote are incorrect, there would have been no legal basis to Baker Act him the night before. So, I mean, we can look at it in hindsight and say that, yeah, if we had Baker Acted him the night before, maybe the situation would have been averted. Very likely it wouldn't have been, because as soon as he got to the hospital and the doctor realized that there was no basis to hold him, the doctor would have immediately released him. There's a misconception that a Baker Act is a 72-hour hold. It's not. It's a hold of a maximum of 72 hours. I've seen people get released in 2 or 3 hours who get Baker Acted. So again, if there is no legal basis, number one, we're opening ourselves up to legal liability by Baker Acting somebody when there's no reason to Baker Act them under the law. And number two, when that person does get evaluated by a professional, they're just going to be released. So, I mean, would it have prevented anything? There's absolutely no way to know.
Good evening, Captain Messmer, Robert Irvin. In the statement, I noticed that the suspect, Mr. Sidney, was found handcuffed by one of the senior officers that arrived on the scene, lying there. Was there any medical aid attempted on him? Because I see that he was pronounced dead by the fire department once they arrived. But the time between the shooting and them arriving, do you know what happened during that period of time?
Yes, there were, I don't know if I have it with me, I know the report was very, very long. There were a couple officers who were there on scene, and they did write in their supplements that immediately after the shooting, they went in and did provide medical attention. They were providing CPR. But yeah, you're correct, he was handcuffed, but they were providing CPR.
Is that the standard to, when you're doing life-saving measures, to handcuff the suspect?
I think probably what happened in this case was that the officers who were involved in the shooting, after he went to the ground, they immediately handcuffed him, and then other officers who ran in afterwards are the ones who started the life-saving efforts, because there were quite a few people there at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment, I concur with the statement that was made regarding the evaluating this situation based on what happened in Texas. You know, you delay and attempt to negotiate the situation versus someone's life possibly in danger, and an immediate decision have to be made as to what can be done to save a life. So unfortunate these things happen, but I concur that I would not necessarily criticize officers for taking the action taken.
I needed to understand why the handcuffs, because I saw them turn him over. Somebody came in and said he was on his back, and I saw blood on his chest, and they started doing CPR. And then one officer went out to do something, and then the other officer continued the CPR, and the fire department got there. So it was obvious they provided him that medical support. But I'm trying to figure out when and why and how the handcuffs. I don't know if you know what would be the procedure for doing that, whether he was turned on his back and then turned back over, and when the officer came in and he saw the blood, you know, that was because they left the handcuffs on, because I think when the fire department came, they announced it. And that kind of concerned me. And that's the biggest thing about this case that I had up at the top and I didn't have. Why handcuffs?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it was an instinctive thing and they just did it right after the shooting happened. I don't really have an answer to that.
Thank you. Again, I apologize for losing my voice for some reason. I want to go back to Ramos again. To your best recollection reading the statements, I know that they had a conversation. I know it was established that they were both Marine Corps veterans. Did it ever come out during that discussion that the decedent received a bad conduct discharge?
Not to my knowledge. The only time that I noticed that is during the actual investigation into the shooting itself, when that information came from the Department of Defense. I don't think anybody knew that beforehand.
Okay, and this is just a comment because I have to work a lot on a personal side. I work a lot in the space with the veterans in my other role. When I read that about the bad conduct discharge, it's significant because, as you probably know and many people know, if you receive a bad conduct discharge, you are not eligible for VA benefits or services or disability compensation. And so it kind of concerned me when I read the statement by Ramos saying that he offered to take him to Haley because they wouldn't have taken him. They would have looked him up and seen that he had a BCD, and they would have said, you got to go to a regular civilian hospital. So I just wanted to get that comment out on the record. Thank you.
Any other questions, statements, concerns in reference to Captain Mesmer? If you will, Ms. Guy.
Thanks, Captain Mesmer, for being here tonight. I just have a question. You know, we've had some presentations on the social worker partners that are out there now. Would this have been, and this is before, this wasn't in action at this point, but would this have been something that when he went to the district office that a social worker may have been called to help determine if the gentleman should be Baker acted?
Potentially, if there was a need, if somebody was on, the cusp of an officer making a determination of do they need it. It doesn't sound like from the information there that there really was it wasn't one of those things where he was kind of on the cusp of does he meet the criteria, does he not? It seems to be from the statement that he wasn't making any comments of that nature, but if an officer thought that having a social worker or mental health counselor come speak to him, that definitely could happen. We use that a lot with the people who we have frequent contact with, who are chronic users of, be it the fire department's resources, our resources, to try to get them, the help they need long term, not the, immediate. We can Baker Act somebody for a short term and fix the problem, but if they don't take their medication, like was the issue in this case, they're just going to keep having problem after problem with them. So those resources are definitely available if the officers think that those resources are needed. Sometimes, like I said, if that person is kind of on the borderline of, well, maybe there's something that I can't do, but I think one of them could, then we would call them up there, and then they would evaluate them themselves and maybe offer them some different services. It sounded like in this case, though, he specifically wanted to just talk to a veteran, a Marine Corps veteran.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Captain Mesmer.
Yes, sir.
The question for the board is whether we concur with the findings and disposition or not concur or even unable to reach a determination. The chair is open to a motion.
I move that we concur with the results of the investigation.
I'll second.
Also, let the record show that Robert Irvin is present after roll call. Board member Robert Irvin has made a motion to concur with the findings in his disposition. Board member Lincoln Tamayo has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? We'll now continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, show by raise of hand. The motion passes. Continuing with the agenda under, Community and Tampa Police Department matters. As citizens prepare their children for the upcoming school year, has raised many questions due to the unfortunate shootings which has taken place across our nation. And upon our June meeting, the question arose, what precautions, what plans, what protocols is our police department taking to ensuring the children's safety for this upcoming school year? If you will, Captain Mesmer, continue.
Sure. So again, Captain Patrick Mesmer, Professional Standards. We do a lot to ensure safety at our public schools. There's a lot of things that we do that really cannot be discussed in a public forum because they involve tactics, equipment, very, very specific things about our operations that just don't need to be publicized because, quite honestly, somebody who wants to commit an act of mass violence at a school would learn those things and use them against us. So there are certain things that I can discuss and there are certain things that I can very briefly kind of go over but not go too into the weeds on. But if there's something that anybody has any questions on, by all means, let me know. So as far as what we do for public school safety, as far as getting the kids to school, because one of the most dangerous things, I know everybody talks about shootings, but traffic and pedestrians and all that. We work very closely with the Sheriff's Office to make sure that all of our crosswalks are manned by either officers or crossing guards, so that's getting them to school. Now, once they get to school, in the public schools, all of our middle schools, K through 8 schools, and high schools in the city of Tampa have a Tampa Police School Resource Officer. Our elementary schools have a officer assigned to them that is staffed by the Hillsborough County Public Schools Public Safety Department. We work very closely with the Public Safety Department. Their chief is actually a retired Tampa Police Assistant Chief. So we train with them. We have interactions with them quite often. A lot of our retired officers go to work for them as school safety officers. So all the public schools in Hillsborough County are staffed by either a Hillsborough County deputy, a Tampa police officer based on jurisdiction, or a Hillsborough County school security officer for the elementary schools. The Tampa Police does not staff the elementary schools. The school security does that, and they are all armed. Our SROs, school resource officers, receive very specific training in active violence incidents. They do that on an annual basis. They do that in in-service training. They are issued specific equipment to be able to address a situation like that to the best of their abilities, as well as many of our patrol officers have specialized weaponry, not just our tactical teams, but our patrol officers do as well. We have other protective devices. There are ways that we can know what's happening and where things are happening, so we know where to send officers specifically in a certain building. It might be difficult, but we have things at our disposal to make sure people know where to go if an incident happens. And as far as the issue about threats of violence, because that's come up quite a bit, we have a procedure in place, again, with Hillsborough County. They have ways for students to text tips either to the school system. We can do it. They can text it to us. They can text it to the school system. The school system works with us to vet threats. If there is a legitimate threat that meets a criminal criteria, we will get involved with that and file the appropriate criminal charges. Many of these individuals who make threats, they have mental health concerns. And again, that is something where we will initiate Baker Acts. If they're threatening violence, that definitely meets the criteria for a Baker Act. The school security and the guidance counselors and counseling staff of the school also, if something doesn't quite meet a criminal threshold, they also will get involved on their angle for the social angle and try to address that student there. So that's kind of a very high level overview, but all of our officers receive training in active shooter. We're all prepared to deal with that. Special training by our school resource officers, the people who are kind of most apt to encounter something like that, and specific training about how to identify, a troubled child. So there is a profile of the type of person who most likely, would commit an act like that. So trying to, identify those people with the help of the school and try to get them some sort of intervention before it could turn into a tragedy. Those type of intervention techniques are also trained. So that's kind of a very high-level overview without going into specific tactical details or telling everybody about exactly who has what equipment and what it is and so forth. But I mean, I can get into more detail if I can, if there's any specific questions about, the specific to the schools.
If you will, Carlos Valdez.
Talk to me about training with staff at the schools and the kids. Is there any type of training or drills are being conducted, led by or input or assistance from TPD?
The school resource officers at the schools that actually have them, they do the typical run, hide, fight training. So they will do the training about, hard corners and things like that with the staff and with the students. For the schools that do not have a TPD officer, for the public schools, I believe most of that training is done through Hillsborough County Public Safety. I know from some of the charter schools or some of the private schools that are in the city, we do have our special incident management unit will provide that same type of training.
Thank you.
To your knowledge, our schools, do they have any, or you can describe or tell us, what physical safeguard programs do any of our schools have? For instance, I was watching on the news not too long ago where this company came up with a creative way where they developed what appeared to look like a bookshelf, but it really was mobile and it had wheels and it was with reinforced steel. And it had a dual function of being a barricade, quickly movable, kids could move it, placed right in front of the door, and then it prevented the shooter from getting in. Do you know of any sort of program like that or any other type of physical barriers or safeguards that we're looking at?
I'm not specifically aware of anything that the school system has purchased that's like that. I do know that there are definitely procedures in place about locking the doors, and that was an issue in a recent incident. They do have strict policies and procedures in place about securing the campus. And I know, like I've mentioned, the hard corners and so forth. I know that's part of the training. As far as any specific items like that are bullet resistant, I don't know of anything that the school system's purchased.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it may exist, but I don't know, and I don't, quite honestly, based on what it is, I don't know that the school system would divulge that either.
Any other questions, statements for Captain Messmer in reference to public safety, school safety?
Just one question. It was public notice on TV today or last night for the involvement of, it might have been the sheriffs that were doing training, and it was quite a few, and I can't remember if it was police or just the sheriffs, but and it appeared to be multi-county. Do we do something like that here in our county if we weren't involved in something like that? And they wanted people to know, so that it was for today because they didn't want you to be alarmed because all of the police and the fire and everything that was going to be, and it was training at one of the schools. Do we, was it Pinellas? Okay, yeah. Do we do any training similar to?
We definitely do active shooter training like that. We do live fire active shooter training. Well, not I say live fire. We don't use bullets. We use airsoft weapons and things like that. So there is a very realistic appearance, and there are loud noises and things like that. But we do use schools for that training, and I believe within the next week or two we're going to be doing a executive level tabletop exercise with multi-agencies between us, the fire department, the school system, and several different other ones, multiple agencies about responding to such an incident if it were to happen.
Thank you, Captain Messmer.
Yes, sir.
We will continue with the agenda under item 9, CRB staff reports and business.
Kamaria Pettis-Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office. Board, we have Ursula Richardson here from my office who's going to provide some information regarding the topic of subpoenas. So at this time, I'd ask for her to come forward to give the board the information regarding subpoenas.
Thank you.
Good evening. Ursula Richardson. I'm an assistant city attorney, chief assistant city attorney with the city attorney's office. I've been with the city of Tampa's attorney's office for 18 years, and my primary function in the office is litigation. So I lead the litigation group, and we do handle the bulk of litigation that the city has. Just to kind of give you an overview, I spoke to some of you during the process of the 2020-2021 formation of your current ordinance. So I have spoken to some of you, but this is basically just to back up and kind of give just like a little bit of a roadmap. You've heard some parts of what was happening behind the scenes from Mr. Shaw, but essentially in June of 2020, City Council made a motion, and that particular motion was to add as a function of the CRB to be involved in the hiring process. That was the initial motion that kind of started this ball rolling, and ultimately that motion led to, of course, obviously the community stakeholders weighing in on other changes that they would like to see added to the ordinance other than just the hiring process. So over the course of approximately a year, as you know, this started in June 2020, and we had a lot of meetings behind the scenes, and we also had a lot of meetings with the City Council over the course of that year discussing the ordinance, the proposed changes, what things could be done, what things could not be done, and ultimately there was a motion made that if there was something that our legal department felt like could not be done, that we submit a legal memorandum to the City Council explaining what we believe could not be done and what our basis was for that. And so in September 2020, we did that. And one of the things that was a resounding theme through that year of the evolution of your ordinance was that there was a push for your board to be less dependent. That was kind of the theme, less dependent on Tampa Police Department for support and other issues. And the two issues that kind of stayed at the forefront of those discussions over the course of the year were you having independent counsel, because as you know before, Mr. Schmid works for the Tampa Police Department as the legal advisor, but he had been with this board since the inception of the board and had provided service to this board over the course of that time. But there were community stakeholders who basically were pushing, saying that there needed to be more of a separation between this board and the Tampa Police Department. The second issue would have been subpoena power. Now, one of the issues that ultimately came to kind of a compromise was your current ordinance recognizes that there should be a separation, and that is the reason why Ms. Pettis-Mackle is here, because she does not work in any capacity with the Tampa Police Department. She represents other boards. She would not be involved in advising the Tampa Police Department on a daily basis. She would not be involved in their daily activities. And so there is a distinct separation from her function that she performs on a daily basis than Mr. Schmid. But that ordinance also sought to incorporate the ability that if for some reason this board decided that there was a conflict, or if something arose where there seemed to be a conflict between the city attorney's office and this board, or some advice or some issue that you needed legal counsel on, that you have the ability to activate the ability to bring in outside counsel to ask those questions and have that person give you that legal advice in order to guide whatever decisions you're looking at, or whatever votes you're deciding to take. And so that's where that ordinance ended up. We ultimately, City Council passed that ordinance in June of 2021. So the question I've heard is, how are we still talking about subpoena power and independent counsel at this point? After the motion passed, I believe it was one of the council members who felt like it was such an important issue about the independent counsel and felt very strongly, made a motion that the legal department and their council attorney, which is Mr. Martin Shelby, work together on an ordinance giving this board independent subpoena power. That motion is still out there, and that was the motion that was presented to you at your last meeting. However, in the course of a year, not just on this issue, but in the course of the year of the City Council talking about other things that it might want to change in the charter, this got rolled into that conversation. So when the workshop was set in May of this year, the motion that had been made by that City Council member for an ordinance to be drafted, that got lumped into the charter workshop, and so that was going to be a topic of discussion, as well as subpoena power. It was the legal opinion of our department that you have to have legal authority behind subpoenas. And I'm here today just to kind of give you some general information, because obviously all I've ever done in my 27-year career. So I've been a lawyer with the City of Tampa for 18 years. I have been a lawyer in total for 27 years. All I've ever done is deal with subpoenas. That's either in the criminal arena where I came from or in this arena for the last 18 years. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about subpoenas. Number one, you have to have some type of legal authority to issue a subpoena. I'm a lawyer who does litigation. I cannot just pull a subpoena out and issue it. It comes with the imprimatur. When I issue one, there has to be a litigation that's in place, and it comes with the authority of the court that gives me the right to issue that subpoena. And so one of our opinions was that the City Council, based on the way that the charter is currently set up, it does not give them the power to grant you that legal authority. The citizens have to do that, and so that's why this has been a continuing discussion. Just to give you a little bit of information, this Thursday they are set, it's item number 16 on the agenda. City Council is set to have a discussion about resetting that charter workshop. I don't know what date they'll be proposing or what they'll be discussing, but it is item number 16 on this Thursday's agenda for City Council to discuss getting a new date set for that charter workshop. And this isn't the only issue for that charter workshop, but this is one of the things that City Council anticipates talking about, taking to the citizens to discuss about the charter. So what I would say to you is I'm here to kind of to give you just a little bit of information about subpoenas, how they work, things like that, so that it may inform that discussion, so that you, if you choose to take any vote, and I'm not saying you should or should not, but if you choose to take a vote about whether or not you do or do not support any effort to amend the City of Tampa's charter in order to incorporate subpoena power as an authority that you have. That's all my comments are here today, just to talk about subpoenas. So one of the things that we talk about is you have to have legal authority. Mr. Shaw mentioned the Code Enforcement Board, and it is, one of you brought it up, it is clear that the Code Enforcement Board serves a different function. They actually listen to cases, make a decision about whether or not our code has been violated, and then they have the ability to impose penalties against those people, and those fines can be pretty hefty. But what's clear about the Code Enforcement Board, the Code Enforcement Board's, their subpoena power didn't come through City Council. It came through state statute. The state of Florida decided that there could be code enforcement boards and that local governments could empower code enforcement boards, and the state of Florida, so it's in the statute, it's Chapter 162. In Chapter 162, it talks about the formation of boards, what they can and cannot do. It talks about fines, how they are to look at, how they levy fines, and as a part of that, it also includes that if necessary, in adjudicating those issues of code enforcement, that they basically can issue subpoenas in those instances. So that is one place where you talk about it. Civil Service Board is another statutory creature. So Civil Service Board, if the city takes some type of employment action against an employee, that employee has the right to appeal to the Civil Service Board, and the Civil Service Board is actually adjudicating whether or not the city made the right call. If they determine that the punishment was too harsh or that we should not have terminated someone, they can actually reverse that determination and also impose other things like back pay, et cetera. So they're adjudicating whether or not the city has taken the appropriate employment action. And subpoenas can be issued, again, that is through, it's a statutory creature, it's a creature of state of Florida law that would allow that Civil Service Board that if they needed to subpoena witnesses that were pertinent to that employment decision or action, that they'd have the ability to do that. So that's the number one thing that I want to say, that there has to be some legal authority for the issuance of a subpoena, and those are just two examples of where that authority comes from those particular boards. The other issue I wanted to raise for you is I wanted to explain what a subpoena can do. Subpoenas can basically compel a person to appear before you, so that's number one, it's a command. I'm often telling people in my cases that the subpoena is a court order, at least in my instances, it's a court order, it is not an invitation. So it commands presence, and it can also compel, actual testimony. Now, whether or not a person actually cooperates with the process, that's a whole another ball of wax, but the subpoena itself can actually bring the person to you, and it can actually have that person answer questions if they're willing to do so. The other thing a subpoena can do is it can compel the production of things. So in my litigation cases, if someone's making a claim that there's a personal injury because one of our city vehicles had an accident, if the person is claiming to be injured and I need to know what those injuries are, I can issue a subpoena to Tampa General Hospital or wherever they got their treatment and compel the production of Tampa General's records that supports whatever this injury issue is. But where my parameters are set, I can't subpoena anything, everything, or go on a fishing expedition. There has to be some relevance, and there has to be some information that I'm looking for. I just can't go and say, okay, this person's making a personal injury claim. I think I'm going to send a subpoena to every single hospital in the city of Tampa or every single hospital in Hillsborough County, and I'm also going to just randomly, I have to have some type of clue that I need the information and where that information can be found. As Mr. Shaw told you earlier, a subpoena cannot be issued, from this perspective, from the Citizens Review Board perspective. There has been litigation all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court that ended in 2017 with the opinion that because Florida has the Officer's Bill of Rights, that compelling a police officer to come before you or come before any board, but come and testify and give testimony in this type of situation. That particular instance was Miami. Miami had basically issued a subpoena to this particular officer for him to show up. That officer then went to court to challenge that board's right to subpoena him. He also asked the court to quash his subpoena and give a protective order that would keep him from having to testify. That is the litigation that led all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, and ultimately they determined no police officer can be subpoenaed in these type of situations involving investigative panels for police misconduct, et cetera. Because as you well know, the Officer's Bill of Rights sets up a process. It's their process of how things are to be investigated. And if discipline is going to flow from an investigation, only the agency can issue that discipline. That is the way that that's in a nutshell, the Officer's Bill of Rights. So Mr. Shaw is absolutely correct that if you were to have subpoena power, it could only apply to non-law enforcement witnesses. The next part is the process, and this is the part that we deal with on a daily basis. Essentially, somebody has to draft a subpoena, and it has to contain, the sufficient language and information. It's usually an attorney who's drafting it because you want to craft it in a way that it's not overbroad. You want to make sure you're actually asking for the things that you want to ask for as opposed to being on a fishing expedition. An attorney has to sign it. So from my perspective, if I'm issuing a subpoena in one of my litigation cases, I sign that subpoena. So I have basically put the court's power behind this subpoena, and because I'm a member of the Florida Bar, I have now basically signed that I have done what I did in good faith in pursuit of the information in this particular litigation. And then it requires somebody to serve. That's the practical part of it. So from my perspective, over the course of the years, the cost of serving a subpoena has increased. It costs somewhere between $30 and $40 to subpoena a person or records. And if they have to go to more than one place to do it, they charge you for every place they have to stop. So if you give them, this is the hospital's address, but they get there and the hospital has a different address where that subpoena needs to be served, they charge another amount in order for them to go to the second location. So there are practical considerations for you to consider when you're thinking about what this means as a global picture. Average cost is between $30 to $40, and then the issue is of enforcement. So if I issue a subpoena in one of my litigation cases and a person refuses to come to court, refuses to come to a deposition, doesn't show up for a trial, my recourse is I have to talk to the judge, and the judge is the one that ultimately has to issue a penalty or contempt or issue a sanction. That wouldn't be any different for this board. If, in fact, you were having pushback or issues about a subpoena that you issued, the remedy for that would be circuit court. That's what would have to happen. What I heard in your voicemail from the caller who called from down in Miami, what she was referencing is that the CIP down there wanted to subpoena records from the University of Miami. University of Miami, they basically asked for the records. University of Miami took the position that they would not turn the records over voluntarily, and that they would not turn the records over without a court order, period. So even when the subpoena was issued, their position was this subpoena is insufficient, it requires a court order. And there are places where even when you issue the subpoena, say for instance, Tampa General Hospital, I believe St. Joseph's is also the same way. Even though I may issue a subpoena, they either will require that I get an authorization from the patient to release those records, so the subpoena sometimes isn't good enough to get it done, or they require me to get a court order. So even with my power of the court and signing the subpoena, I still have to jump through some additional hoops depending on what type of information I'm looking for in order to get it. Another place where we have some difficulty in obtaining records is usually cell phone records, social media records. There's a bunch of hoops that have to be jumped through in order to get those kind of things, and it can be a bit of a task in order to get that information. But just so you know, if you run into a problem, the enforcement mechanism would be the court. That means filing an action. Filing an action means paying a filing fee, which is usually approximately $400, and then the cost of serving the person you want to tell to come to court so the court can tell them what to do. So those are practical things that come along with trying to deal with subpoenas. And like I said, I deal with it from a litigation standpoint. Let's see. And then the potential issues for you. I know that somebody mentioned something about Ring cameras. Privacy issues are things that come up frequently. Even in the medical records situation, people raise privacy issues frequently. So you also have to expect that if, as a practical consideration in dealing with subpoenas, there is the potential for people to raise privacy issues as a reason why they will not give that information even if you hand them a subpoena. There are also the potential for people to raise Fifth Amendment concerns. Obviously, if you bring somebody to testify and that person believes that that testimony can incriminate them in some type of criminal activity, they have the right to invoke their Fifth Amendment right to be silent. And the only way to uninvoke is to go to a court and have that court basically discuss whether or not that person has properly invoked or whether or not it's a privilege that they can maintain. We do have those issues as well, where we're in the middle of a deposition and a witness raises, that issue that they won't answer a particular question because they believe that it may incriminate them and won't answer the question. And the last thing is also the potential for maybe stepping on the toes of another agency. And these are things that can be addressed, obviously. But if a subpoena that was issued in this instance in some way conflicted with a subpoena over at the state attorney's office and their criminal investigations, there is a potential for there to be an issue, but there are also ways to kind of work through that. One of the things that they did in Miami is if a subpoena were to be issued, it has to be vetted. It has to jump through a couple hoops of vetting before it would be issued, just to make sure that it doesn't run afoul of those issues. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And then again, cost. One of the things that a person can do is if they're subpoenaed to testify, we give them a witness fee. The law requires that we give the person a witness fee, and we also have to cover mileage. Those Tampa General records that might equate to 2,000 pages worth of records, we don't get those for free. We actually have to, there is a statute that says we get the first, I believe, 25 or 50 pages at $1 per page, and every other page is 25 cents thereafter. So they get to charge us for the cost of pulling the records, searching for the records, and they also get to charge us for the cost of copies, so nothing is free. So those are my statements or things for you to consider as far as the practical application of what it means to use subpoenas. So.
Yes, sir. Well, excuse me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was excellent, an excellent explanation. A question for you. So would you say then, hypothetically, if we have citizens, concerned citizens, and they would like to see this board have this type of authority, subpoena authority, would it be reasonable for them to, let's say, lobby their respective legislators, their elected officials, to sponsor a bill that would in fact, authorize or develop this sort of capability for this board?
You mean from the state of Florida's perspective?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, that is certainly, because the state of Florida is the one who basically put the Officers' Bill of Rights into effect. So if the state of Florida were interested in making citizen review boards or private citizen boards to have that authority in the same way that they empowered the Code Enforcement Board or the Civil Service Board, then certainly the Florida legislature has the ability at any time to make those type of decisions and incorporate that into the statute, if they so choose.
But again, that would be initiated by the citizenry.
Mostly.
The activists, the advocates.
They could.
Speaking to their political components in the legislature to consider sponsoring a bill to that effect.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Shaw, you have your marching instruction.
Well, city council members are elected officials, and several different municipalities like the city of Miami, Broward County, Miami-Dade County, Orange County, all have
Ms. Richardson, if the CRB were to be given authority to issue subpoenas, would that authority come through a vote of the subpoena issued from a vote from the CRB, or it cannot be done unilaterally by any one CRB member?
What would happen is kind of what Mr. Shaw was explaining to you. The way that you change, which is our charter, is our city's constitution. Just like the Florida State Constitution, the charter is our constitution, and the way to change that is either through a petition, through the voters getting enough signatures in order to make that happen, or it happens through the city council itself passing an ordinance and then getting it onto the ballot for the next election. So
passing the ordinance and then going to ballot.
Correct. So the ordinance is for the proposition to change, but then the voters themselves would have to agree to those changes at the vote.
Okay. But then in practice, let's say that that authority is granted. Subpoenas would then be issued by vote of the CRB as opposed to a unilateral decision by the chair or vice chair or any one member.
That's correct, and that's the way it works. And the panels that Mr. Shaw is referencing, those panels were created through charter changes, and they have a procedure or process that's in place that the board would need to vote, essentially agreeing that a subpoena would be issued, and then at that point, the attorney would take their marching orders and issue that subpoena.
Okay, thank you.
When you were mentioning the changes that we went through, and thank you, I was one of those individuals, and I learned a lot from you when you did it, and I've learned even more here. So I thank Ms. Pettis for bringing you here. Thank you. You mentioned that when the initial change was made, that if the CRB felt there was a conflict of interest, that we could ask for an independent counsel to come in any issue. Is that what you said? Is that already in effect?
It's already in your current ordinance. So, as the discussion was happening, that was, I think, and I don't want to say who exactly made that suggestion, but at some point someone was saying that that would be a compromise to the extent that you would receive a lawyer who did not work directly for the Tampa Police Department and also have the ability to get outside counsel if a conflict arose.
So that is already in effect today?
Yes, ma'am.
As a result of the previous ordinance?
Yes, ma'am. Your ordinance was passed in June 2021 of last year, and it became effective in December. So as of December 2021, that provision is already in your current ordinance where you have someone who is separate from the department, and you also still have the ability, if a conflict arises, to get outside counsel.
Okay. And before I relinquish this mic, with that already in the ordinance, it's in the hands of the city, and they made these changes, city council, and the citizens. Is there any reason that we as the CRB should even be voting on that? Or do we need to give the city council our opinion when the opinion is that of the citizens? Let them go to them and give them. Is it required that we give an opinion? Why should we even give an opinion?
Because you're the board who would be carrying out those particular functions. So I think that it's one thing to talk about people. I think it's another thing to talk at people. It's another thing to talk to people. So the people who would be most affected by the changes are the people who are before me today, serving on the board. So from the perspective of, I believe it was Chair Akil who went to the May 23rd meeting. I believe it was you at your meeting right after that who brought up whether or not he was speaking for himself or whether or not he was speaking for the board. But you all had not had the opportunity to discuss it. And I believe it was your comments at that June meeting that essentially led to this discussion, because he did appear at that May 23rd meeting to talk about it. And then you wanted to know whether or not he had, it was personal, which I believe he did say he was speaking for himself and not on behalf of the board.
He did.
Which had not had the opportunity to discuss it.
And now we've had an opportunity to discuss it with education, more detail, as well as a different point of view from the community with ACLU.
Yes, ma'am.
And I still say we don't need to make any changes. It's not a, I'm not voting.
So I'll, first of all, thank you for the information and for all the data that we have gathered as well from Mr. Shaw. I do want to bring back to the table the motion that I made last month.
Okay, so you need me to sit down? Are you?
Is there any other questions for Ms. Richardson in reference to questions about subpoena and how that works and anything of that nature? Okay, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
One moment. This guy has a question in reference to the item on the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson, for helping us work through this, because it's a big help. I am still struggling with when this board would ask for a subpoena. And the example given was the Ring cameras. And you are absolutely right. That's a privacy issue. If I have a Ring camera and you subpoena my Ring camera, I'm going to sit there and say, no, you're not getting my Ring camera. And, there are citizens that do register their Ring cameras with the police department, and those cameras are used to help the police department. But that's the only example anybody's come up with. Is there another example out there that you can share with me that would be a time when we would ask for a subpoena? Because I can't come up with one, and if anybody else could, I would love to hear it, because I can't imagine what it would be.
I'm not certain that I'm the person to answer that question in the sense that, based on what your ordinance says in your function, I'm not sure where that would come into play necessarily. I know that it's been said over the course of discussions that there might be people who won't, because the police department, even though they're charged with investigating, their professional standards has to investigate, they don't actually have subpoena power. I know that it has come up in the sense that maybe the people might want to, maybe somebody knows or a witness has knowledge about a police incident, et cetera, but they won't come into the department, they won't talk to them, and perhaps that would be a situation where that person could be compelled to give testimony. But I don't know, even, again, from the practical consideration, compelling me to appear does not compel me to testify.
Well, see, based on what you're saying, would that be an instance where the police department would come to us and say, we can't get this information? I can't imagine that, because we only deal with cases that are closed.
Like I said, from a practical standpoint, you're correct. I'm not certain where that would come into play in the way that your current ordinance is drafted, so I'm not really sure. But there could be a situation where something is ongoing and maybe a subpoena could be helpful. However, what I will say to that is that the police department works closely with the state attorney's office. The state attorney's office can issue investigative subpoenas. Right. So even before they charge people with a crime, by the way, I work for the state attorney's office under Mark Ober, so I know this for a fact. I'm not, it's not, I'm not telling you what I heard, I'm telling you what I know. We issued, when we were at the state attorney's office, we issued investigative subpoenas ahead of time in order to get information to determine, basically how to move forward as far as criminal charges were concerned. So I would believe that if it was something imperative for the police department to have, that will be a situation where they would reach out to the state attorney's office and ask them to use their investigative power subpoena in order to obtain that information. That's the best I guess I can answer that particular question. Yeah.
Ms. Guy, again, Captain Patrick Messer, Professional Standards. Let me just jump in on that question real quick. First, to point out, like this case we reviewed today is 4 years old. If there was Ring camera video, it's gone. So there would really be nothing left at this point to subpoena. Now, one of the comments that was made by the Miami individual mentioned how subpoenas helped them in a case involving an officer who was accused of double dipping. Double dipping would mean getting paid by the city while you're working another job. Well, that's also called theft, which is a crime, which, like Ms. Richardson just said, we can get a subpoena for that. And that would be a criminal investigation in addition to an administrative investigation. So the police department can and would and does get subpoenas in all criminal investigations. So they don't, it's the same thing. They have to cooperate with that subpoena that's issued through the state attorney's office. So while it's true that I, conducting an administrative investigation in professional standards, cannot obtain a subpoena, if there is a parallel criminal investigation, we always can get a subpoena in a criminal investigation. And that seems to be a lot of the things that are brought up here, like in a shooting such as the one issued today or discussed today, we could get subpoenas during the course of that investigation. If there was video of that shooting that somebody didn't want to provide, we could get subpoenas or even go so far as to get a search warrant to obtain that video. Search warrant is even a higher standard than a subpoena. So there are ways that we can get subpoenas when we're investigating police misconduct. I don't want anyone to think that the only way for a subpoena to be issued if we're investigating an officer is for a board like this to issue one. We don't operate that way. We can get a subpoena whenever we're investigating. FDLE can get subpoenas and warrants when they're investigating anybody for a crime. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. You will, Mr. Valdez.
Yeah, I would like to bring back to the table the motion from last month. As mentioned last month, one of our roles is to build trust with the community as it relates to the Tampa PD and the community. So we did hear today from several community members as it relates to this matter. We do have a lot of data in front of us that we've collected from the survey that was presented to us. So I would like to reword my motion from last month. And I think that it's critical to have the input from the community. So I would like to propose or make a motion that we recommend for the public to vote on whether or not this board should have an independent counsel as well as subpoena powers.
Just as a correction, the motion in reference to independent counsel has already been performed and carried out. The only available motion on the floor will be in reference to the subpoena power, only as an amendment to the city's council in reference to the charter.
And in that case, that we can't include the independent counsel, then I'll reword my motion. That motion would be that we recommend for the public to vote on whether or not this board should have subpoena powers.
Second.
Mr. Carlos Valdez has placed a motion on the floor in reference to taking a vote upon. Can you just restate it for the record?
Sure. The motion on the floor is that this board recommends for the public to have a voice and be able to choose and vote on whether or not this board should have subpoena powers.
And just to clarify, when you say to give the public the opportunity to place such
To have it on the ballot.
Excuse me? Don't they have that right already? What that, I don't
No.
understand the comparison in reference to this.
The motion is to have it on the ballot for the public to vote on whether or not we as a board should have subpoena powers or not. So if the community votes on that they agree that we should have it, then we should acquire and adopt that. If the public decides not to, then we continue conducting business as usual, and of course with the direction of City Council and our attorney that we're currently working with.
The board members on this panel understand the motion?
Because we don't have the ability to put it on the ballot. If you rephrase that to talk about the charter, that's what we intend on voting on, but recommend that the city council put it on the charter.
As you will, Ms. Tamara Pettis-Knocker.
Sorry, Kamaria Pettis-Knocker from the City Attorney's Office. We need to take a brief 4-minute recess for the, to switch the camera equipment.
Okay. We'll adjourn this board and adjourn this panel for 4 minutes recess. The Citizen Review Board is now in order. And I just want to re-implement on what City Council is asking from the Citizen Review Board. And I also want to applaud City Council for giving us the opportunity to share our opinion in reference to the subpoena power in reference to the charter itself. Again, the City Council is asking our opinion in reference, do we want to support it? That is the question. So I want to kind of stay on script and give them what they're asking for. Again, I applaud them for allowing us to have the opportunity to share our opinion. And obviously, it is vital, being that, as Ms. Richards said, would be the one implemented. So I give you the opportunity to restructure that motion in reference to being concerned to the question at hand that City Council has placed on the table.
So back to the motion that has said earlier, thank you. Back to the motion that I put on the floor earlier. In this case, we will reword the motion to include that it implies that if I'm recommending for the motion or for subpoena powers to be given out to the community, I would like to move forward with a motion that this board recommends for the board to have subpoena powers.
Say that again.
The motion on the floor is that we recommend for this board to have subpoena powers.
Dr. Collins, go ahead and pass the microphone.
I'm not sure exactly what you've asked to be done, but if we're going to do it, somebody correct me. The motion was on the floor, it was second, and we were having discussion and we had to stop. The person who seconded the motion got to withdraw that motion if the motion is going to be changed. I haven't withdrew the motion, and I don't mind if that's what the board really going for, but I'm going to make my statement now. I feel that we are here today with a modified set of orders, call them anything that we want to call them. It came from the city, did not come from the state, because the City Council made some decisions and they did not come to this board. They made decisions to give us the council, the independent council, the way it has been stated, and I asked the question, did we have it? So if we were in conflict for any reason, we already have the opportunity to go for independent counsel. They gave that to us. That was not in the original ordinance that we had, whatever. In addition to that, we are now doing community meetings that they gave to us. They did not come to us and ask us. They told us to do it, and now we are doing it. Additionally, they also gave us something that we were already doing, which was a survey. And many people in the community, until after we had an uprising in this country, had no idea what we were doing, who we were, and what we were doing. And when they found out, they all went to the city council, et cetera, and they made changes without looking in detail on what we were already doing. So the reason I second the original motion, I have not withdrawn it, but I will if the maker want me to, because I'm not going to second that emotion. I think the city council did just in asking this board what we wanted. And what we need to say to the city council, and not turn the city council or the people in the community against the CRB, is do what you feel would be beneficial for the city of Tampa, and let's give it back to them.
Don't drop that on our shoulders.
Maria Pettis-Malco from the City Attorney's Office. I just want to, as the maker of the motion, he is entitled to amend his motion. If you don't want to second his amendment, you are entitled to do that, but he can't amend his motion.
Can you withdraw the motion?
You can't.
I can withdraw a second, and he can remake the motion. He didn't amend that motion. He changed the whole motion.
He did amend Dr.
No,
Collins.
he changed the motion. Content-wise, he changed the total motion.
So,
Now, do you want me to withdraw? I don't know.
no. So
That's up to you if you want to withdraw your, second, that's up to you.
we're going to go with the motion that was first on the floor because it was second. So out of respect for Dr. Collins, we will move forward with the motion as it stated before that we recommend for the public to be able to vote on whether or not this board should have subpoena powers. So the recommendation is that we are in favor of the public having the voice to be able to vote on whether or not we as a board should have subpoena powers. And when I say that we just let the community decide, I mean putting it in the ballot so that they can vote on in November or whenever elections are going to happen for this specific matter.
There's a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
You already have a second.
Any further discussion?
Can you repeat the motion, please? Because I'm confused.
Sure. So the motion,
The motion on the floor is for the recommendation to City Council to give the opportunity to the citizens to place this item in a ballot and have the community vote.
Is that the motion?
that's the motion for the community to vote that we agree on that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor to the motion that's on the floor, please show by raising hand. Any opposed to that motion, please show by raising hand. That motion passes. The recommendation for the Citizen Review Board is to inform City Council that we prefer to put it on the ballot and let the community decide. We'll now continue with the agenda.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry. We'll continue with the agenda, the CRB staff reports and business. The second item, I'm not sure if a discussion is necessary regarding the Tampa Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program. We had a presentation. We also received the update in reference to the revised program. Is there any new changes that we aren't aware of? I believe the last presentation was given by Chief Dugan in reference to the revised editing part of that particular program.
It's Captain Messmer again, Professional Standards. I believe it was back in January, now retired Assistant Chief, Interim Chief Delgado, did make a presentation to the board that, you know, the crime-free program was abolished in last year, and now there is a new program that's much different that has replaced that, and the board was presented all that information back in January, but there's nothing that's changed since then.
Okay.
Question.
If you will, Ms. Valdez.
Is the new program that we are currently operating under the investigation that we currently have?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
You mentioned that there's a new program that the multi-housing program is no longer in operation. Is that correct?
Correct.
We are now operating under a new program.
Correct.
We are, the city, not we, but the city is under investigation for the Tampa Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program.
Correct.
Is the new program also being taken into consideration under the investigation. So is that new program, anything around that program involved in the investigation currently?
Not to our knowledge.
Can we have a presentation on the new program? Because I don't believe when Chief Delgado presented to us, he presented to us on the parameters of the new program.
Okay, I don't know. I thought that was done in January, but if the board makes a motion for that, we'll come back if that motion passes and we'll do a presentation.
So I would like to make a motion that this board recommends for the current program that we don't know what it entails, that came out of the Tampa Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program, to be placed on hold pending the investigation outcome of the Tampa Crime-Free Multi-Housing Program.
There's no motion on the floor. Mike Smith, give us assistance, please.
Just to clarify, I mean, what Captain Messmer said is we presented it in January, we presented the SAFE program. I'll leave it for the board's recollection to remember, but we presented the Tampa SAFE program, and it would essentially be the same presentation we would provide again. But if that's the board's pleasure, we can provide the Tampa SAFE program again.
So the new program is what was presented in January, the SAFE program?
Yes, sir.
Got it. Okay, so that wasn't clear, so I'll take my motion off the floor.
Thank you for that clarification, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Valdez. That will conclude, if you will, start.
But if Mr. Valdez doesn't remember, and there were public comments about that tonight, what harm would it be if we revisit it and had the presentation again? I think we have some new board members too. So that might be something that we would want to do. I'm just asking the question.
Yes, and that would be a great idea if we can particularly do it at our next community event, being that it seems like we're getting more attendees to attend. I think it'll be the best way to do it.
September.
You want to place that in the form of a motion? If you will, ensure any dialogue is recorded, please.
Sure. I think it would be a great idea, or maybe productive, to do the presentation in our District 5, where the program may have the most impact on, so that we can, have the community that's being impacted the most present and invited to listen to and have their voices also heard on what, their thoughts are.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, you will, Reverend Banks. Pass the microphone, please.
Inasmuch as there were several public speakers regarding the old program that may not be knowledgeable of the new program, can we have some information available to them so that they can go find it on the website and read up on it and determine whether or not their concerns have been resolved?
Yes, if you will, Captain Messmer. Approach the podium, please. Mike Smith. If you can give the audience some direction in reference to, as Reverend Banks said, the website where they can become more knowledgeable of the existing program, so everyone can be on the same page until we find the results of the current motion on the floor that Mr. Valdez just presented.
If you'll give me a minute, I'll look that up. I don't know it off the top of my head, but there should be, through Tampa Police Department's website, there should be some information about the SAFE program just by accessing the TPD website. In addition, the officer assigned to that is Officer Gig Brown. He is the coordinator of the program. You can reach out to Officer Gig Brown at the Tampa Police Department for more information about the Tampa SAFE program. But again, the information of Tampa SAFE program, we're about to get kicked out of the library. The Tampa SAFE program can be found through the TPD website.
Thank you, Mike Schmidt. There's a current motion on the floor in reference to a presentation of the Tampa Safe program to be held in September at our, I think, next open forum meeting in District 5.
Correct.
In September, District 5. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Irene Guy has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? We'll continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. That motion passes. Will that be ample enough time in September to return and share with the community in reference to the Tampa Safe program? Great. Yes.
Mr. Urban didn't vote. Can you redo the vote?
Okay. We're going to continue with the vote. All those in...
If you want to abstain from it, just let us know. Okay.
Okay. For the record, Mr. Irvin has abstained from that particular vote. We'll now continue to the next item as we wind down while down here. The items that was continued. There was an item continued and was placed on the agenda of the case number 21F-001 in regards to the MOR 1204. There were board members who want to get an explanation in reference to why that MOR 1204 was not sustained in that case of 21F-001.
Sure, and again, Captain Patrick Messmer, Internal Affairs, Professional Standards. So I did the disposition on this particular case. This was, I wasn't present, I was at a training conference when this case was presented. So I sustained a violation for criticism and gossip, and also sustained a violation for supervisor responsibility due to the actions. I did not sustain an attentiveness to duty charge based on the content of the manual of regulation. I didn't find any information in the case that basically showed that due to those actions, they were unable to actually get the job done as the supervisors of the DUI squad. There wasn't any evidence that the productivity of the squad suffered, that they weren't able to complete their reports accurately, that they weren't able to submit the required things that they were supposed to do as the supervisors of the squad administratively or operationally. So there just wasn't any evidence that, basically sending text messages that were not really appropriate impacted their actual ability to be attentive to the job. So there were violations there, but based on reading the MOR, employees shall be attentive to their assigned duties and responsibilities. They shall not convey a lazy disposition such as lounging in public view or sleeping on duty. Definitely weren't sleeping on duty. There's another section of this MOR requiring employees to report organized crime, racketeering, vice conditions, or violations of law to their supervisor. That didn't apply. Department employees shall not read work-related newspapers, periodicals, or similar materials in public view. There was no idea that there's no evidence that they were doing anything in public view. Employees should not play games, watch TV or movies, otherwise engage in entertainment while on duty, except may be required in the performance of such duty. Employees shall not participate in any activity or personal business, which this was personal business, which could cause them to neglect or devote inadequate attention to their duties. So, if we're going to say you can't send a text message so an officer can't, call their spouse and say goodnight, they can't send a personal text message, that's just unreasonable. So, that's what the policy says. You can't participate in personal business which could cause them to neglect or devote inadequate attention to their duties. There was no evidence that they devoted inadequate attention to their duties or neglected their duties. What they did was gossip and subvert the decision of upper management about the mask policies, basically, but they didn't actually neglect their duties by doing that.
Thank you, Captain Messmer. I believe Mr. Valdez has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to say I disagree with that fact. There's a difference between somebody sending a text message to a loved one versus somebody gossiping about what other people are doing within their working hours, and somebody dressed as Santa Claus. I've been in those patrol cars doing my ride-alongs, and that screen, that computer is active. When certain calls come on, there's a whole bunch of waiting calls and other things that needs to be done and addressed. For somebody to sit there and just go back and forth on text about stuff that's not of importance to their duty at that current moment, I think it does qualifies as attentiveness to duty because they're putting so much effort and time into that. Again, there's a difference between a text message to a loved one, that it's some type of emergency or whatnot, but I just don't agree there with that fact.
Yep, there definitely is a difference, and that's why the criticism and gossip was sustained, because they were sending text messages that were gossiping. If they were sending text messages to loved ones, we would not have sustained the gossip policy. So again, we don't have timestamps on these. We don't know if these were being sent every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 30 seconds. Those weren't provided. So there again, we did not feel that there was enough evidence that said that those text messages caused them to devote inadequate attention to their duties. We don't even know which ones actually were sent during on-duty hours and which ones were sent during off-duty hours. None of that was in the screenshots of the text messages. So that's the explanation of why that was not sustained.
Thank you, Captain Messmer, for that further explanation. We'll now continue with the agenda for the announcements and any new business. Mike Schmidt, is there any new business to be discussed?
No, sir, I don't have anything for you.
The next meeting will be held on the fourth Tuesday of the month of August 23rd at the Old City Hall building located at 315 East Kennedy Boulevard, 3rd floor at 6 p.m. Board members, if for any reason you're unable to attend the next meeting, please notify our city clerk, Ms. Tanya Wilcox, at least 48 hours in advance so we can ensure a voting forum. Before I adjourn this meeting, I would like to give any of our board members the opportunity to add any final comments or statements at this time. If you will, Mr. Tamayo.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say that I had the honor of representing the CRB yesterday at headquarters, interviewing 26 finalists, scholarship finalists to the Academy, and I was very impressed with that group of 26. They're very, very bright, self-assured, committed to public service, and committed to the city and its citizens. I was very, very impressed. Strong representation from both genders, very good spectrum racially and ethnically. Very impressed with that group. We've got a lot to look forward to with those 26 individuals joining the TPD, hopefully within the next 6-7 months.
Mr. Chair and Board, I want to just give thanks to the staff for this, our first coming out meeting, and for those of you that attended in the audience, including those of you that had to have the videography, video and recording responsibilities. And thank you all so much for this first meeting. And I think the first meeting was successful, and particularly because we had people in the audience that expressed their concerns, and you made it happen by getting it set up for us. So thank you all so very much.
Everything she said.
With no other statements or comments, this meeting is adjourned.